Revenge at Work.
Everybody, and welcome back to Revenge at Work. Today we're breaking down a fictional dramatized story from the world of manufacturing and plant HR. The morning it happened, I was already on edge because plants don't fire people on calm days. They fire people when something is about to change, and they need a scapegoat before the change goes sideways. I'd been with Larkhaven Components for 6 years. Not glamorous work, not office cute. A mid-sized manufacturing plant that made sub-assemblies for heavy equipment. Gear housings, brackets, modules that end up buried inside machines nobody thinks about until something breaks. I wasn't management. I wasn't some loud, I run this place guy. I was the person they called when the line stalled and nobody wanted to say why. Official title: Process Documentation Specialist. In plant language, I was the one who turned tribal knowledge into paper. Checklists, training matrices, lockout notes, changeover guides. Everything that kept the place from falling back into chaos every time a veteran operator took a sick day. And yes, my work had a name in the system. SOPs, Standard Operating Procedures. They weren't just PDFs on a drive. They were the difference between a smooth shift and a safety incident. Between a clean audit and a nightmare. Between we're fine and we've been doing it wrong for months. That mattered because we were under pressure. Corporate had just signed a new contract with a major client. Big volumes, tight tolerances, strict delivery windows. And with it came something plants hate more than a surprise inspection. A timeline that did not care about reality. Over the previous month, we'd been running overtime, patching gaps with temporary operators, and borrowing technicians from maintenance to cover production support. Everyone acted like it was sustainable. It wasn't. But when the line is moving and the numbers look good, nobody wants to hear the words risk or control failure. They want you to shut up and keep the machine running, which is why I noticed the first red flag immediately. 2 Mondays before I got fired, my manager, a production supervisor named Kellen Rourke, stopped by my workstation in the quality office. Kellen wasn't a monster. He just had that plant supervisor energy. Always walking fast, always talking like he had one eye on the clock. He leaned on the edge of my desk and smiled like we were friends. "Need a favor," he said. Plant people don't say need a favor when it's a favor. They say it when they want you to do something you won't like. "What's up?" I asked. He lowered his voice like it was confidential. "We're bringing in someone new, a contractor. He'll be shadowing you." My first thought was simple. Shadowing for what? I already documented processes across departments. I created and updated SOPs with input from the floor leads and engineers. I trained new hires on documentation standards. I did not have a role that needed coverage unless someone planned to remove me. I kept my face neutral. "Okay," I said. "What's his role?" Kellen's smile tightened. "Continuous improvement." That phrase right there is a magic trick. It can mean a real lean specialist. It can mean an engineer with a project. Or it can mean someone being inserted into your lane so management can say they restructured instead of replaced. "What's his name?" I asked. "Darian Voss." Even the name sounded like a consultant. I nodded slowly like I was fine. Inside, my stomach went cold because the timing made no sense. If you want a continuous improvement contractor, you hire them to analyze throughput, scrap rates, changeover time. You do not have them sit on top of the guy who writes SOPs unless your plan is to take the SOPs away from that guy. I didn't argue. Not then. I did what I always did when something felt off. I started paying attention. The next day, Darian arrived. Clean boots, crisp polo, badge that said contractor, tablet tucked under his arm like a shield. He had the kind of confidence that comes from knowing he's not the one who has to live with the mess after. He shook my hand. "Appreciate you helping me get up to speed," he said. His grip was firm. His smile was professional. But his eyes did what experienced plant people notice. They scanned my desk, my screen, the binders. the filing cabinet where I kept the current controlled copies. He wasn't here to learn the plant. He was here to learn me. For the first hour, he asked harmless questions. How do you decide which SOPs are priority updates? What's your review cycle? Who signs off on revisions? I answered carefully. Short, factual, nothing extra. Then he asked the question that wasn't harmless. Can you walk me through your SOP structure and show me where you store your templates? I didn't say no, not yet. I opened the shared drive, showed him the top-level folders, and explained the naming convention. I kept it surface level, just enough to be cooperative. He nodded like he understood. Then he leaned closer and said it like it was casual. And where do you keep your master playbook? Like your personal notes, the stuff you don't put in the official SOP yet. There it was, the real ask, the meat, the part that makes you replaceable. I smiled like I didn't feel my pulse kick up. I don't keep unofficial instructions, I said. He blinked. Really? I document what's approved, I said. Anything else is risk. That word, risk, makes people uncomfortable. It's like turning on a light in a room where everyone was pretending they didn't see the mess. Darian gave a small laugh, like I was being overly strict. Fair, he said. We'll get along. But I noticed something right then. After that conversation, Darian stopped asking about the plant. He started asking about the shortcuts. Which SOPs were outdated but still used? Which steps operators ignored? Which lines had special situations? He wanted the truth behind the paper, and I understood why. Because the paper wasn't the only thing keeping that place alive. The paper was the shield. The truth was the liability. By the end of day 2, Kellen called me into his office. He didn't waste time. Look, he said, rubbing his forehead like he was stressed. Darian needs to ramp fast. Corporate wants him fully independent by next week. Independent, meaning not needing me. Kellen slid a printed schedule across the desk. My name had blocks on it. Training sessions, walkthroughs, handoffs. It was laid out like a transfer plan. My calm voice surprised even me. What's the business reason for me training him on my documentation workflow? Kellen exhaled hard. Don't make this complicated. That was a sentence I'd heard before. It means, stop asking questions, or you'll make us admit what we're doing. I'm not trying to, I said. I just want clarity. Kellen stared at me for a long beat. Then he said it. We're aligning roles. Budget cuts. This is how we protect the team. Protect the team. Another magic phrase. It translates to, someone has already decided and you're about to lose. I nodded. I can help with controlled handoff of approved SOPs, I said. I can't train someone to replicate my job while my status is unclear. His jaw tightened. You're refusing to support a transition. I'm refusing to participate in my own removal without documentation of what's happening, I said. If HR wants a formal knowledge transfer plan, I'll review it. Kellen's face changed. The friendly mask slipped just a little. Okay, he said. I'll loop in HR. He said it like a threat. And that night, for the first time in years, I didn't go home and switch off. I opened my laptop and pulled up my own records. Not company secrets. Nothing dramatic. Just my work history. The projects I'd completed. The training materials I'd built. The audit findings I'd helped close. The emails where leaders thanked me for saving the line during changeovers. And I created a clean timeline. Dates, facts, attachments. Because in a plant, stories don't protect you, paper does. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would change how the next 48 hours unfolded. And it would also expose why they were suddenly so desperate to get my SOPs after they walked me out. Next morning, the plant felt different the moment I walked in. Not because anything obvious had changed. The conveyors still hummed. The forklifts still beeped. The break room TV still played a news channel no one watched. But people avoided my eyes. That's how you know HR has already started talking. When a plant wants to get rid of you, they don't announce it. They let the rumor do the dirty work first. They make you feel like you're already gone. So you'll either quit, explode, or make a mistake they can point to later. I kept my routine. Badge in, safety glasses on, coffee, straight to my desk, and sitting there, right on top of my keyboard, was a printed sheet with my name in bold at the top. Knowledge Transfer Plan, Process Documentation. It listed dates, times, rooms, and deliverables, like I was a vendor contract. It wasn't signed. No HR header, no formal policy reference, just a schedule someone had typed up and dropped like a warning. And at the bottom, in a section titled Scope, was the line that made my jaw clench. Includes templates, personal checklists, and undocumented best practices currently held by incumbent. Undocumented best practices. So they knew what they were doing. They weren't asking me to train Darian on the plant. They were asking me to hand over the invisible part of my job, the judgment calls, the if this happens, do this, the lessons learned from mistakes, the quiet safety checks that never make it into an SOP because management doesn't like how they read. Because those best practices are what make you valuable. And those are exactly the things you never give away for free, especially not while someone is sharpening the knife behind your back. I didn't rip the paper up. I didn't storm around. I didn't complain to coworkers. I scanned it, saved a copy to my personal notebook, and wrote one sentence at the top in pen. Please provide HR policy reference and employment impact statement. Then I walked it straight to HR. The HR office in a plant is always a little too quiet. Carpet instead of concrete. A bowl of candy that feels like a trap. Posters about respect and communication next to a locked filing cabinet. The HR rep on site was a woman named Mireya Halden. Mid-30s, neat hair, calm voice that could make bad news sound like a weather update. She looked up when I entered and smiled like she'd been expecting me. Hey, she said, what can I do for you? I held up the paper. I found this on my desk, I said. I want to know if it's official. Her eyes flicked to it, then back to me. Oh, that. The way she said it, like it was already decided, made my skin prickle. Is HR directing this? I asked. Mireya folded her hands. We're supporting a transition, she said. I kept my voice even. A transition to what? She didn't answer, not directly. This is normal, she said. Cross-training, business continuity. Cross-training, another magic phrase. But cross-training doesn't look like this. Cross-training isn't built around one person's personal checklists. Cross-training doesn't happen with a contractor shadowing you like he's auditing your brain. And cross-training doesn't show up on your desk the day after you ask if your job is safe. I tried again. Is my role being eliminated? Mireya's smile stayed in place. We're evaluating staffing needs, she said. But you're still employed. Still employed. That's the line they use when they want you to keep working while they take your parts. I nodded slowly. Okay, I said. Then I'm happy to support normal cross-training within my job description, but I won't provide personal materials or undocumented practices. Her brow tightened just a little. Why not? She asked, like she was genuinely confused. Because it's not cross-training. Because you're trying to strip me down to a file cabinet. Because I'm not donating the only leverage I have. But I didn't say any of that. I said, because anything undocumented hasn't been reviewed for safety, quality, or compliance. If I hand it over informally and something goes wrong, the responsibility lands on me. There was a pause. Mireya looked at me like she was measuring how difficult I would be. Then she tried a different angle. Darian is here to help, she said. He's not replacing you. That was the first outright lie. Because if he wasn't replacing me, they wouldn't be pushing him to be fully independent within a week. I leaned back slightly. Then it shouldn't be an issue to put in writing that my employment status won't be impacted by this transition, I said. Her eyes hardened. We don't do that, she said. Of course they don't. Because the moment they put it in writing, it becomes discoverable. It becomes a document. It becomes something that can be used later. I stood up. Then I can't participate beyond approved SOP review and process walkthroughs, I said. If you want more, send a formal request with scope, policy reference, and sign-off authority. Mireya held her smile, but it was thinner now. I'll talk to Kellen, she said. Please do, I replied. I walked out of HR and went back to my desk. Darian was waiting, not sitting, standing, leaning against the cubicle wall like he owned the space. Tablet in hand. He didn't ask how my morning was. He said, HR wants you to prioritize the master templates today. I kept my face neutral. They can send that request by email, I said. He blinked like he wasn't used to resistance. I'm telling you now, he said. It's urgent. I met his eyes. I understand, I said. Email. His jaw tightened. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. And there it was, the pressure. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady insistence designed to wear you down. I looked back at my screen and said calmly, I'm protecting the plant. If it's urgent, it should be documented. Darian stood there for a second, then walked away without another word. But I watched him from the corner of my eye. He didn't go to his desk. He went straight to Kellen's office. And 10 minutes later, my inbox pinged with a meeting invite. HR discussion required attendance. No agenda, no notes, just a time and a room. And for the first time, I knew exactly how this would go. Because in plants, when HR calls a meeting without an agenda, it's never a conversation, it's a script. And the moment you sit down, they start reading. That was just the beginning. When I walked into the conference room, the chairs were already arranged in that neat, forced symmetry that always makes you feel like you're the problem being handled. Kellen was there, Mireya from HR was there, and sitting a little off to the side, too quiet, too composed, was a man I hadn't met before. Not plant staff, not a supervisor, no safety glasses, no steel toe scuffs, no radio clipped to his belt. He wore a blazer in a place where blazers look like costumes. Mireya introduced him without warmth. This is Quentin Lyle. He's supporting HR on staffing alignment. Staffing alignment. Translation, corporate HR. Quentin didn't offer a handshake. He just nodded like I was a file he'd already skimmed. Thanks for coming, Mireya said, tone careful. This is a formal conversation. That opening line is HR code for, watch your words, because we're already building the record. I sat down, placed my notebook on the table, and said nothing. Quentin spoke first. We understand you've expressed resistance to knowledge transfer, he said. Resistance? I almost laughed at how quickly they reframed it. I hadn't refused to help. I'd refused to hand over undocumented material without policy and scope. But if they say resistance, it makes me sound like a problem employee, not a person protecting liability. I kept my voice measured. I'm not resisting knowledge transfer, I said. I'm requesting that any transfer beyond approved SOPs be formalized, specifically anything described as personal checklists or undocumented practices. Mireya gave a patient smile like I was being difficult on purpose. This is business continuity, she said. We need to ensure operational resilience. Operational resilience, another shiny phrase that meant, we want your brain without keeping your body. Quentin leaned forward slightly. Let's simplify, he said. Are you willing to train Darian Voss on your role? There it was, the direct question. I felt the line inside me tighten, because if I said yes, I'd be cooperating in my own removal. And if I said no, they'd label it insubordination. So I did what I'd trained myself to do in every difficult meeting. I answered with structure. I'm willing to walk through approved SOPs, current process maps, and my open documentation queue, I said. I'm willing to explain how I prioritize revisions and how I coordinate sign-offs. I'm not willing to provide informal materials that haven't been reviewed. Kellen's face hardened. He looked like he'd been waiting for me to say something that would justify what they wanted to do next. Quentin nodded slowly, like he was listening. Then he said, Your position requires collaboration. Refusing to train a colleague is not collaboration. He paused deliberately. And we've received feedback that you've been difficult during this transition. Difficult. That word is poison in HR documents. It's vague enough to fit anything and sharp enough to cut. I looked at Mireia. Who provided that feedback? I asked. She didn't answer. That's confidential, she said. Of course it was. They were building a fog where facts couldn't breathe. I opened my notebook and wrote down the time. Then I looked back up. If I'm being accused of misconduct, I said calmly, I'd like a written summary of the concern, the policy reference, and an opportunity to respond in writing. Quentin's expression didn't change. This isn't a misconduct meeting, he said. This is a performance and expectations conversation. Expectations. Another word that sounds harmless until it's used to justify termination without saying the word. He slid a paper across the table. It was a one-page memo, already printed, with my name and employee ID. At the bottom was a line for my signature. Employee has been informed of expectations and agrees to comply. I didn't touch it. What happens if I don't sign? I asked. Mireia answered with that calm voice again. Signing doesn't mean you agree, she said. It means you received it. That's another trick. They say it's just acknowledgement, but later it becomes, he was counseled and refused to cooperate. I kept my hands folded. I'll review it and respond by email, I said. Kellen leaned forward, impatience flashing. No, he said. You sign now. We need this closed. Closed. That word hit harder than it should have, because that's what they were doing. Closing me. I looked at Kellen for a long moment. Then email it, I said. If it's legitimate, it can be sent through official channels. Quentin's voice dropped a fraction. Are you refusing a direct instruction? He asked. I felt the trap tightening. This is where employees panic. They either lash out, or they back down, or they say something emotional that gets written down as hostile. I didn't do any of those. I said, I'm requesting proper documentation of the instruction. I will comply with formal, policy-based requests. Mireia's smile vanished for the first time. Quentin sat back. He looked at Mireia. Mireia looked at Kellen. And in that silent exchange, I could see a decision being confirmed. Quentin nodded once. All right, he said quietly. We'll take a break. He stood and left the room. Mireia and Kellen followed him out. I sat there alone for a full minute, staring at the memo on the table, feeling the air thicken. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from a number I didn't recognize. Check your access. Now. No name. No context. Just that. For a second I thought it was a wrong number. Then a cold thought landed in my chest. Darian. Because he'd been hovering around my workstation, asking about templates, asking where things were stored, and if they couldn't get what they wanted through pressure, they'd try another route. I stood up and walked back to my desk fast, heart steady but mind racing. I logged in, my screen refreshed, and instead of my usual folders, I saw a blank, dead message. You do not have permission to view this location. They'd cut my access while I was in the meeting, not terminated yet, not formally removed, just quietly disabled, so they could control what I could save, what I could reference, what I could prove. That's when something inside me broke, not into rage, but into clarity. Because now it wasn't about my job, it was about what they were trying to take and what they were trying to hide. I didn't know it yet, but the next move they made, the one they thought would isolate me, would trigger a chain of events that would put the plant leadership on defense within a single shift. And it would start with a locked folder and a paper trail they forgot existed. The first thing I did was not call anyone. That's what they wanted. An emotional outburst they could write down as unstable, disruptive, uncooperative. Instead, I took a slow breath, stood up, and looked at my screen like I was just troubleshooting a normal system issue. Then I did the only move that matters in a plant when the floor turns political. I created a record that couldn't be rewritten later. I opened a blank email and addressed it to 3 people at once: Mireia Halden, Kellen Rourke, and the plant's IT service desk mailbox. Subject line: Access change during active HR meeting, documentation impact. And I wrote it in plain, boring language, because boring language survives scrutiny. I stated the time I entered the HR meeting. I stated the time I returned to my workstation. I stated the error message. I no longer had permission to the controlled documentation repository. I listed the immediate operational impacts, SOP revisions in progress, pending sign-offs, and the training matrix updates scheduled for that week. Then I asked 2 direct questions. Who authorized the permission change? What ticket number or change request documented it? And I ended with a sentence that felt polite, but carried teeth. Until access is restored and ownership is clarified, I will not provide informal copies of controlled documents through personal channels. I hit send. Then I stood up, walked to IT physically. Plants run on face-to-face pressure, and I wanted witnesses. The IT cage was behind a locked door near maintenance, where the air smelled like solder and dust. The tech on duty was a quiet guy named Soren Pike, the kind of person who survived by staying neutral. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't say they're sabotaging me. I showed him the screen and said, "My permissions were changed while I was in an HR meeting. I need the change record." Soren's eyebrows lifted slightly just once. He spun his monitor toward himself, tapped into the access management console, and started searching. I watched his face tighten as the audit trail populated. He didn't narrate it. He didn't need to. After a moment, he said, "This wasn't a normal removal." "What does that mean?" I asked. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "It's not just your group membership," he said. "Someone applied a deny at the folder level. That's intentional." Intentional. That word landed like a cold weight. "Can you print the change history?" I asked. Soren glanced toward the hallway like he was checking whether someone was coming. "We don't usually print that," he said. "I'm not asking for a favor," I replied. "I'm asking for the ticket number and the timestamp. That's standard." He nodded slowly. Then he pointed at his screen. "Change happened during the time window you said," he murmured. "Triggered by an admin account. Not mine, not Kellen's, not Mireya's. An admin account. And that's the kind of detail executives love to hide behind, because it creates distance and plausible deniability." Soren created a ticket, attached the audit snapshot, and read me the number. I wrote it down in my notebook and thanked him like it was routine. Then I went back to my desk and found Darian standing there again. He didn't look smug. He looked hungry, like a person trying to finish a job before someone stops him. "You got locked out?" he asked, pretending he didn't already know. I kept my voice calm. "IT's handling it," I said. He leaned in slightly. "Look," he said, "we're under pressure. If you just send me the SOPs directly, we don't need to wait for permissions." There it was. They didn't cut my access by accident. They cut my access to force me into the only path that benefited them, sending controlled documents off system, outside audit controls, into a contractor's hands. So I gave him nothing emotional to work with. "I don't distribute controlled documents outside the system," I said. "If leadership needs emergency access, they can request it through document control." Darian exhaled sharply, annoyed. "You're making a big deal out of nothing," he said. I looked at him, held the silence for one beat, then said, "Nothing doesn't need secrecy." His eyes flickered, and then almost casually, he tried again. "Okay," he said. "Then at least send me your templates. Those aren't controlled." That was the moment I realized the whole plan. They didn't just want the finalized SOPs. They wanted my workflow, the template structure, the review checklist, the prioritization logic, so they could keep producing documents after I was gone, while claiming the process never depended on me. I didn't argue. I opened my notebook, turned it slightly so he could see I was writing, and said, "If you want templates, email the request and list the business justification. I'll route it for approval." Darian's jaw tightened. He walked away fast, and I knew what he was going to do next, because when the polite pressure fails, people like that escalate. But that was just the beginning. I went back to my email thread. Mireya replied first, not with answers, of course not. Just a sentence that looked neutral but felt like a shove. Please remain available and cooperative today while we resolve access issues. Cooperative. They were planting the word early so they could use it later. Kellen replied next, shorter. Stop delaying. Darian needs what you have. And that's where I stopped being the person trying to work it out. I pulled up the plant's quality management system portal, the official one tied to audits and compliance, and opened the document control change request form. It had fields you can't undo with a hallway conversation. Document impacted, reason for change, risk assessment, approver list, effective date training impact. I created a request titled Emergency Clarification of Ownership and Access, Controlled SOP Repository. I wrote in calm detail what had happened. Access removed during an HR meeting, contractor requesting off-system copies, and the operational risk of uncontrolled distribution of controlled documents. Then I checked a box most managers forget exists. Potential compliance impact. Because plants live and die by audits, internal, customer, safety, ISO. Pick your flavor. The moment something touches compliance, it stops being a manager problem and becomes a leadership exposure. I added 2 approvers who were above Kellen's reach, the quality director and the EHS manager. Then I submitted it. The system generated an automatic notification, and 5 minutes later, my phone rang. It wasn't Mireya. It wasn't Kellen. It was the quality director, Alden Strake, calling me directly, voice low. "What did you just file?" he asked. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't rant. I told him exactly what happened, step by step, and I gave him the IT ticket number. There was a pause on the line, then Alden said quietly, "Stay at your desk. Don't send anything to anyone. I'm walking over." When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt since the HR meeting started. Relief, but sharp, not soft. Because now it wasn't my word against theirs. It was in the system, time-stamped, routed, auditable. And if anyone tried to bury it, they'd have to bury the whole workflow that kept the plant compliant. In places like this, the trap is to be helpful off the record. That's where they strip your leverage. If it matters operationally, it belongs in a system with timestamps, approvers, and accountability. You don't win by arguing. You win by forcing the truth to exist somewhere they can't quietly edit. Alden showed up less than 10 minutes later, walking fast, eyes scanning my screen. He read the access error, read the email thread, and his face changed. Not into anger, but into that controlled focus leaders get when they realize someone just turned a personal conflict into a corporate risk. He looked at me and said one sentence. "Who told the contractor to ask you for off-system copies?" And right then, I understood something else. They hadn't just tried to replace me. They'd tried to pull controlled documentation out of control. And once that's visible, it stops being about me. It becomes about consequences. Alden didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He stood behind my chair for a moment, reading the access error on my screen, then scrolling through the email chain I'd sent. His jaw tightened once when he saw Kellen's line about, "Darian needs what you have." Then he said quietly, "Do not send anything to anyone. Not a template, not a screenshot, nothing." I nodded. He straightened and walked out without another word. And that's when the plant did something it almost never does. It slowed down, not on the floor, but upstairs. Within 15 minutes, my phone buzzed with a calendar invite from Alden. Document control review, mandatory. Attendees, Alden Strake, Quality Director, Della Myron, EHS Manager, Soren Pike, IT, Mireya Halden, HR, Kellen Rourke, Production, and surprisingly, Darian Voss. They weren't calling it an HR matter anymore. They were calling it document control. That distinction matters. Because HR meetings are soft. They're about tone and compliance language. They leave room for interpretation. Document control meetings are hard. They are about traceability, approvals, training impact, and audit exposure. In that room, vague words die. I walked in with my notebook and nothing else. No dramatic folder, no gotcha binder. Just timestamps, ticket numbers, and the calm confidence of a person who knows the system works when you force it to. Alden opened the meeting standing, not sitting. Before we discuss staffing, he said, we're discussing an access change to the controlled SOP repository that occurred during an active HR meeting. He turned to Soren. Confirm the facts. Soren cleared his throat, eyes flicking briefly toward Kellen and Mireia, like he wanted no part of the politics. At the time logged in the ticket, he said, an admin account applied an explicit deny on the folder for the documentation group. The deny targeted one user. He didn't say my name, but everyone knew it. Della, the EHS manager, leaned forward. Why would anyone apply a folder-level deny to a controlled repository? She asked. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. The kind that feels like someone just realized they're standing under a spotlight. Alden looked at Mireia. HR, did you request this? He asked. Mireia's voice was measured. HR did not request a system change, she said. We were addressing a cooperation issue. Cooperation issue. There it was again. Alden didn't take the bait. He looked at Darian. Did you request access through IT? He asked. Darian's expression tightened, polite but defensive. I flagged an urgency, he said. We needed documentation to support continuity. Della's eyes narrowed. Continuity doesn't require uncontrolled distribution, she said. Did you ask him to send SOPs outside the controlled system? Darian hesitated half a beat too long. I suggested it as an option, he said. Alden's gaze moved to Kellen. Did you instruct the contractor to request off-system copies? Alden asked. Kellen shifted in his chair, suddenly less fast-talking than usual. I told him to get what he needed, Kellen said. We're behind and... Alden cut him off calmly. Answer the question. Kellen swallowed. Yes, he admitted. I told him to ask. And in that moment, everything that had felt like a personal fight snapped into its real shape. They weren't trying to do knowledge transfer. They were trying to bypass controls. Alden took a breath and said, Okay. Then he looked at me for the first time in the meeting. Did you refuse to train? He asked. This was the moment they expected me to sound bitter, emotional, vindictive. I didn't. I refused to provide undocumented materials or off-system copies of controlled documents, I said. I offered to walk through approved SOPs and my open queue through normal channels. I asked for the policy reference and scope in writing. Alden nodded once, then turned back to Mireia. So we have, he said, counting on his fingers, a contractor requesting controlled documents off-system, a supervisor instructing that request, and a targeted access deny applied during an HR meeting to pressure an employee. He looked around the table. That is not continuity. That is a control breach. Della leaned back, arms crossed. And if a customer auditor asks how controlled SOPs were distributed last week, she added, what do we say? That we handed them to a contractor by text message because production was stressed? No one answered, because they couldn't. Alden's tone didn't change, but the consequences started landing anyway. First, he said, IT will reverse the deny and preserve the audit logs. Soren, I want a full change record. Soren nodded. Second, Alden continued, any requests for controlled documents will go through document control only. No exceptions. Darian, you will not receive documents through personal channels. Darian's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Third, Alden said, eyes on Kellen, you are not authorized to direct changes to controlled documentation access. Effective immediately, you will not be involved in access approvals. Kellen went still, and then came the part I didn't expect. Alden looked at Mireia. HR's claim is refusal to cooperate, he said. but the actual record shows he refused an unsafe, non-compliant request. Mireya opened her mouth, but Alden kept going. "We're done using cooperation as a label," he said. "If there's a performance concern, it will be documented with specifics. If not, it stops today." The room stayed quiet, but the air changed, because the story they were building about me, difficult, resistant, unhelpful, had just been replaced by a record about them. And once that record exists, HR doesn't get to rewrite reality. The meeting ended with Alden giving me one instruction. "Go back to your desk," he said. "Continue your normal work. I'll handle the rest." I walked out feeling strangely empty, not triumphant, not happy, just clear. That afternoon, my access was restored. The folder was back, my queue was back. Everything looked normal, but I'd learned something. Normal is what people wear like a mask in places like that. 2 days later, HR called me again. This time it wasn't Mireya alone. It was Mireya and Quentin, the corporate HR guy in the blazer. They sat across from me and Quentin spoke like he'd rehearsed it. "Given recent events," he said, "we're moving forward with a separation." My stomach dropped anyway, even though I'd seen it coming. He slid a document across the table. Severance. NDA. Standard clauses. The usual. Then he added almost casually, "We'll need your SOPs before you leave. We need to ensure continuity." And I understood. They didn't learn from what happened. They just adjusted their angle. I kept my hands still. "I'm happy to leave controlled documents in the controlled system," I said. "They're already there. Versioned. Approved. Routed." Quentin frowned. "We need them compiled," he said. "A full set. Exported." "Exported where?" I asked. He hesitated. Mireya answered too quickly. "To the transition lead." "Which system?" I asked. "Which ticket? Which approver?" More silence. "Because the only reason you need an export is if you plan to move it outside control again." And that's when I made my final move. I slid my notebook forward and said calmly, "Before we discuss separation, I need written confirmation of what happened last week and what corrective actions were taken, because I filed a compliance impact request, and I don't want my name attached to any uncontrolled distribution after I leave." Quentin's eyes narrowed. "You're making this adversarial," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm making it traceable." He held my gaze for a long moment. Then he pushed the severance back toward himself like it was suddenly heavier. "We'll follow up," he said. 48 hours later, my phone buzzed again. A message from Mireya, short, formal. "Please send your SOPs. We need them urgently." I stared at it for a full 10 seconds. Then I replied with one sentence, the sentence that ended the whole game. "All controlled SOPs remain in the controlled repository. If you need access, submit a document control request and list the approver." And I didn't send a single file. Because here's what they don't tell you until you live it. When a company fires you and still demands your work product off system, they're not asking for help. They're asking you to be their liability sponge. The next week, I heard from a friend still on the floor. A customer auditor had asked for documentation traceability related to the new contract ramp. The plant had to explain the access deny, the contractor request, and the attempted off-system handoff. The explanation wasn't pretty. Kellen got removed from the project and reassigned. Darian's contract ended quietly. Quentin stopped supporting the plant. And as for me, I took a role at a different facility. Same industry, better leadership, clearer controls. And the irony was almost funny. The place that fired me for refusing to train spent months rebuilding the very system I'd tried to protect. If you ever find yourself in a situation where someone demands your knowledge while hiding their intent, don't fight with emotion. Fight with structure. Make them use tickets, approvals, systems, policies. Because revenge isn't yelling. Revenge is leaving behind a record so clean that their version of events can't survive it. And the best part? When I look back on it now, I don't feel anger. I feel relief, because they wanted my SOPs. What they got instead was proof.